My name's Arvil Nagpal. I feel like this is a little bit of a weird juxtaposition after Viola Davis's great speech, which was very inspirational. We're going to be talking about IT automation. So it's a little bit of a different track here. I feel like you guys are all here for this part of the conference, though. So thank you for coming. In case you're lost, this is really about automating onboarding and offboarding from any system of record. We're going to be talking about HR systems. We're going to be talking about directories. I am here actually co-presenting today with Cameron Boote. Cameron is a senior applications administrator with Veterans United Home Loans, and he's going to be talking about the real-world applications for all the product marketing I'm going to be doing here around what it means to implement it, why it could be valued. He'll be talking about what it means to actually deploy UltiPro as a master. So super excited for him to be talking today. This is I don't know, just don't take this with a grain of salt. I think that's what this means. I want to talk a little bit about our vision for the product, just to start things off. First, through Universal Directory, we really want to be the single source of truth for your organization for all identities, right? We want to automate user life cycles as any user moves through the joiner, mover, leaver life cycle. And then finally, we want to connect to everything. We talked about some big investments we're making related to extensibility of our platform, and really that's all about expanding what we have today within the Okta integration network. And this is for any identity within your company. This isn't just employees. This could be contractors. It could be partners. It could be customers. So I'm going to be talking, the structure is basically, I'm going to talk for like 6 or 7 minutes. I'm going to talk about why this product area is important and what the product does today. I'm going to turn it over to Cameron. He's going to tell you about a little bit about his journey. And then we're going to talk about roadmap. And then finally, we're going to give you a little bit of a demo with our newest investments in workflow. So how many people have heard about the joiner, mover, leaver lifecycle? Show of hands, just real quick. Okay, or maybe 50%. So for the other 50%, I'll just quickly talk about what we think about when we think about joiner, mover, leaver. Joiner is really about getting people access to everything they need on day one. In order to do that, we've got to connect to systems of record, HR systems, traditional IT directories. It could be a self-service registration portal. And ultimately, you need policy in order to assign resources to people in terms of birthright applications, as well as modules to figure out, hey, for things that aren't birthright, how do we get people access to things that they request? Second, we've got mover flows. These are complicated. You've got job changes, you've got promotions, you've got marriages, you've got leave of absences. As Okta, as an identity management system and an access management system, we need a way to flexibly determine who should have access to what during these mover flows in a RBAC type model, so a model of kind of least privilege. And then finally, with leaver flows, we kind of think of it in two ways, immediate versus scheduled, but ultimately this is really about security and compliance. So when someone leaves your organization, how do you ensure that all the things that they have access to, they no longer do have access to those things? So we're going to talk about a little bit about kind of how our product works today with all three of these in more detail. Did anybody go to the session around minimizing your dependency on AD that was yesterday? Okay, just a few folks. We know that probably 90% of the Okta customer base right now is still AD or LDAP mastered. That's a reality of the situation, but we actually think that HR as master is the architecture of the future. We think that your Okta should connect to your source of truth, and that is ultimately your HR system. That's where your employees, your contractors, your customers are based. And so when we see this for workforce identity, this is more or less the architecture that we see a lot of customers implementing, and that Cameron is actually going to talk through exactly what they did. So the way it works today is we run scheduled imports from an HR system, and you'll see Active Directory there is now downstream of basically your cloud architecture. And so this is not kind of an overnight thing, but we see this as the architecture that a lot of customers are implementing to go cloud native. So cloud HR systems, cloud directory, cloud applications. Your on-prem systems that are still dependent on AD as your authentication mechanism are downstream, and we have a bi-directional syncing mechanism in order to enable that. We think that this architecture has benefits across departments. We know probably most of the folks here within IT. When we talk to IT customers, it's really about reducing total cost of ownership. When we talk to customers, sometimes they have 5, 6 systems that help to manage kind of this joiner, mover, leaver lifecycle. It's really to improve productivity through automation and reduce the errors involved with manual onboarding, offboarding. For HR, it's really how do you reduce that friction between yourselves and IT? How do you make your employees successful on day one? And ultimately, you know, employees, they just want access to the things that they should have access to when they start. They don't want to have a lengthy process between finding out what should I have access to, what could I have access to, and then actually getting access to those things. Automation is really in service of kind of all 3 of these departments benefiting jointly. So I'm going to go into a little bit of detail on each of these 3 elements. So when we think about joiner and we talk to customers, and Cameron will definitely highlight this, what we hear quite often is it's email, it's ticketing systems, it's forms that provide the interface between HR and IT in determining who is new to the organization and what they should have access to, right? These processes definitely don't scale. It's high touch, it could lead to errors, and it just, as the company grows, it leads to a huge burden as you try to replicate this process, not just for a few hundred users, but for a few thousands of users. And so the way that our product more or less works today is on a scheduled import basis from source systems like SuccessFactors in this case. So you could set configuration for how frequently you want to import. Those users will be brought into Okta and be created. And ultimately, based on the group that they're in access to, or simply the applications they have access to, we'll either assign the users to those applications, and when we have provisioning enabled, so automated account creation into those systems, we'll go ahead and create those accounts. So this is a pretty seamless, automated process that's very configurable throughout different parts of the flow. But this is how we see a lot of customers getting successful in trying to solve specifically the joiner problem. In some cases, you know, we do have write back, what we call write back. So we know that Okta or your HR system sometimes isn't the source of truth for every data point on a user. For example, RingCentral could create their phone number, or Active Directory or Office 365 could create their email, right? And so we do have the capability to actually sync all the way back in the other direction. So your HR system is now in sync with some of those downstream systems as well as Okta. Second, I'll talk a little bit about the mover flows. User accounts change, right? People get promoted, people get married, they switch departments, contractor to full-time conversion processes. And you know, there's definitely a desire to automate these and reduce the pain of what maybe sometimes feels like one-off changes that you're kind of dealing with on an ad hoc basis. And so the way that we kind of deal with this today, or we recommend folks deal with this with Okta, is through 3 primary mechanisms. And they really all relate to how do you determine who should have access to something. The first is group rules, which is what the screenshot shows. So if a user has certain attributes, then they should be part of a group. You can then assign that group to an application. That's kind of primary number 1. If you model groups in a different system like Active Directory or LDAP, we can also import those group memberships directly. So let's say you have legacy processes around users getting assigned to groups and then wanting to import those into Okta. We have deep capabilities that can support the importing of memberships. And then finally, we do see customers wanting to go kind of outside of our base functionality. Sometimes you'll hear about ServiceNow being used for access or access management, or at least the workflows governing how someone should get access to something. They'll then call our APIs to assign users into groups in order to model that through our API surface area. So you kind of have a few different things in your tool belt in order to manage these mover processes. And then finally on leaver, we actually think leaver is very different. when we talk to IT administrators, PowerShell scripts, right, or manual offboarding flows. That's what a lot of folks use today, and especially for those that are in environments which need to be compliant or companies that have gone public. We were just talking to a customer a few days ago, and they failed their SOX compliance because they found out that people had rogue accounts. And not only did they have rogue accounts, they didn't have the documented paper trail in order to demonstrate that they had the correct process in place for offboarding, right? So one of the goals of automation is not just to reduce the manual offboarding flows, but it's to create that record for what's occurring between systems so that if an auditor asks, then you can show them that, hey, I had the correct mechanisms in place. And more or less, the way it works today is this kind of depends on the connector, but I'm going to use Workday as an example here. We kind of have two modes for deactivating a user today. You more or less have scheduled. That's mainly what folks use today. So on a periodic basis configured by you, you will set up scheduling from a source application. And that termination date or last day of work within Workday will trigger the termination of a user in Okta. Once that termination occurs, we will not only cut off SSO access through Okta, but for those applications where provisioning is enabled, we will actually remove their accounts from all those different systems. So Box, Tableau, Active Directory, for example. Sometimes terminations are sensitive. It's unfortunate, but people get fired, and sometimes you need to deactivate someone immediately. And so for Workday specifically, we have functionality called real-time sync, where you can basically send a one user of call to Okta, and we will terminate that user immediately. So it's not part of a kind of batch import process. So that's kind of intro, and I'm going to hand it off to Cameron now to tell you a little bit about his journey with Veterans United.
Well, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Like Arvil said, my name is Cameron Boote. I'm a Senior Applications Administrator at Veterans United Home Loans. We are a full-service 50-state mortgage lender headquartered in Columbia, Missouri. So, for those of you who haven't heard about us, I'm going to show you a quick video, so hopefully you get a little better feel for what we're all about. Hopefully you saw by that video, we're a company just driven by our values, and those values are be passionate and have fun, deliver results with integrity, and enhancing lives every day. And all of those values fuel our ultimate purpose of proudly serving those who have served our country. So if we have any veterans here in the audience, I just want to say thank you for your service and the sacrifice that you've given to this country. So how did we get started with Okta? Well, like many of you here, we started using Okta for single sign-on. We had an ADFS solution that wasn't scaling with our business, and like we heard in the keynotes this morning, identity and access really isn't our core business. Our core business is providing loans to veterans. So we went live with SSO in 2015. About through that same time, we still had a manual joiner process like Arvil talked about earlier. It was tickets, emails, you name it. It came from many different sources. And that was not scaling with our business. So at that same time, we even onboarded 740 employees in 2016 alone. So something had to change. We couldn't keep doing that manually. So our legacy joiner process looks something like this. HR would still enter that information for the new hire into UltiPro. That would trigger an email off to a distribution list. So how many of you here, by show of hands, are still using distribution lists within your businesses for core onboarding, offboarding, like onboarding at, moves at, things like that? Oh, well, that was us 2 years ago. IT was the recipient of one of those emails. And then people in IT would take that information, Control-C, Control-V, copy and paste into various systems that the employee needed working at the company. So obviously, error-prone process. Errors would happen. Sometimes 3 weeks, even a month later, we'd get a ticket from the employee, "Yep, I can't access the employee directory," or "I can't access system X." So not a great first impression for a new employee. So like I said, one of our values is enhancing lives. And with our new joiner process, that's something we wanted to do. So we wanted new employee accounts to be ready day one. We wanted their apps to automatically be assigned based on their roles, their title, their department, things they needed to do their job every day. That was going to reduce the manual data entry. And then throughout their life at the company, that was also going to improve their process when they changed jobs, got promoted, or took a different position within a different department. So moving to HR as a master. We wanted to give HR full control over the data they should own anyways. IT didn't need to be in the business of managing job titles, departments. We didn't need to have a separate request to us telling us, "Hey, this employee changed jobs." So another benefit would be changes are reflected faster. So you get married, you only have to go to one place and tell HR, "Hey, I got a new last name." That's going to get pushed down to everywhere else through Okta and to all the other systems that are connected and using Okta for the universal directory. Arvil mentioned the leaver side. Immediate deactivation. We deactivate that Okta account. That's going to trickle down and immediately lock the employee out of email, ServiceNow if they're using it, all these other systems that are using Okta for single sign-on. And then on the mover side, least privilege access. When somebody changes jobs, if we're building groups and roles based on department, we're able to immediately remove permissions that they had in their old job and give them the permissions that they need for the new. So we ran into a few issues with just the timing of how our process works. We don't move employees into our core UltiPro system until they've actually come on site and we've verified that they're eligible to work for us. But we were able to quickly get around that leveraging the Okta API. So UltiPro is still sending that email in the new process. But ServiceNow, our ITSM system, is a recipient of it. ServiceNow is then leveraging the Okta Lifecycle API to immediately create that new account. And then Okta takes care of the rest, pushing that down to other systems, including Active Directory. Now, once that employee is on site and we verify they can work for us and we see their passport or driver's license, etc., they're moved into UltiPro Core, and then from then on, they are mastered by UltiPro. So let's talk about delivering results. That was another value I mentioned earlier. So since go live in April of 2017, so about 2 years ago, this number is actually old. I looked this morning. We're sitting at about 820 employees that we've onboarded automatically, 50-ish in the past month. We're hitting summer, so we're hiring a lot of interns for our company. We've processed over 1,200 job title changes and conservatively estimate that saved 750 hours. So if you do some rough math there, that's 93 8-hour workdays that we got back. And we're not even a large company compared to some of you here. So just some takeaways I'll leave you with. Partnering with HR was huge for us. And in our case, that involved dedicating an analyst in IT to work directly with them in the process and just be their go-to guy. Second, you need to understand your source of truth. It may not always be your HR system, like Arvil mentioned. So for us, email, phone extension. Those are things that are mastered in Active Directory, pushed back to Okta, and then reflected back into UltiPro. So that data is still all in one place. And then third, security is just a natural outcome. Security was really excited when we couldn't tell them, hey, we're going to be removing access from an employee when they change jobs. Our old process, we'd maybe go back and audit some of that stuff 3-6 months after they already transitioned. So just not a good security posture to have. And looking forward, we currently aren't auto-confirming matches when employees import from UltiPro. And I believe Arvil is going to talk about something that may help us with that. So that's matching a person and knowing exactly, hey, this person A is exactly person A and not person B. And then on the mover side, we still have a few kind of roadblocks and a little hiccups throughout that process that we think we can smooth out. And I think some of the announcements from the keynotes this week definitely will be able to help us. So we're really, really excited to see what Okta can help us do going forward. Back to you, Arvil.
Got it. Thanks. Appreciate it. That was awesome. I think it always makes it very real. I feel like I could drone up here all day, but unless you hear about someone going through the process, I think it makes it concrete. So let's talk about roadmap. 2018, our investments focus in kind of 3 core areas. More systems. So one issue that we have is that we have a set of out-of-the-box connectors to different systems. We also have toolkits for you to connect to any system that's not supported today. One thing we constantly heard was around the need for a least common denominator, which is a CSV. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that feature. More flexibility. You know, people love our product because it's easy to use. It's a single consolidated pipeline for how you're bringing users into from other systems. But as customers get larger, we need more flexibility within that pipeline. So we're going to be talking about a couple features there. And then depth of customization. I think as part of Todd's keynote yesterday, he really talked about some of our platform investments around opening up our platform and providing more customization to customers. And I think we've got a really awesome feature specifically related to imports. So to start us off, CSV Directory. This is exactly what the UI looks like. You can now ingest any CSV into Okta and enjoy all the functionality that you've seen with Workday or UltiPro or AD and exactly how those users are being brought in. So you've got out-of-the-box matching logic. You've got configurable profile editor. You've got configurable mappings in order to transform that data as it comes in. You've got recurring imports. And so for those systems, we hear a lot of times, hey, I've got contractors and they're not in my HR system. Or, hey, we just acquired a company. How do I connect them to Okta? Or, hey, I'm not quite ready yet to go with Workday as a master. I need a stepping stone in order to get there. And we think this is a really flexible solution in order for you to bring those users into Okta. So you simply drop that CSV into a file folder, you install a lightweight agent, and that'll pick it up every hour, every 3 hours, however long you would like to ingest that data for. So this is going to be generally available in May. Currently, it supports what we call a full import, so that file needs to have all users within your organization, but we're currently working on what we call incremental imports, so the ability to only import those users that have changed. So you'll kind of have both models that you'll be able to utilize. Second feature is kind of what Cameron hinted on. Within our matching logic today, or prior to this feature, you can match on a few kind of core attributes like username or email. But what we found was that often organizations will vary in terms of what you guys use as their GUID, right? The globally unique identifier within your organization. That could be something like their employee ID, or it could be something else. And so now we're just providing you the flexibility that if that value exists on a user being brought in, we will match effectively in determining, is this someone new, or is this someone that it should be linked to an existing user? If you want to concatenate attributes in that profile to be really sure that this matching logic is correct, you can also do that here. So basically, any attribute that's on the profile that's configured within Profile Editor and is appropriately mapped between two systems, you can now use this feature for to really improve the fidelity of that matching process. And again, this will be generally available in May as well. Third feature is really around how does Okta become more flexible in complying with your business process for when an import should occur from a source system. Sometimes we hear things like, you know what, I don't want to run an import like at any time. I want to do it after hours so I don't interrupt my users. Or I want to run a full import on a different schedule from an incremental import. For example, in this case, we've configured here where you can now schedule an incremental import every day at 9 o'clock Eastern, but a full import where maybe you just want to clean up records and make sure these systems are in sync. I want to do Monday, Wednesday, Friday at midnight Pacific. So now we're providing a lot more flexibility into when these imports can be scheduled from any system that you want to ingest user data from. And so this is currently in early access, so you can contact support and get the feature flag turned on for your work. We'd love your feedback. And then finally, this one is I think, a pretty transformational change and ties nicely to a lot of the messaging that we've had at Oktane about workflow. Who kind of heard the session, the keynote session, heard about inline hooks? Have you guys heard this session? Yeah, so basically, in the course of an import, Okta will now pause. All right? Usually it was like, we're ramming every user through. We're going to pause for you to execute code within your own server. We have a request response pattern that will allow you to customize, if you see fit, advanced use cases in the course of a user being brought in. And currently this is supporting for new users being brought in, and we're currently working on user updates. But let me give you a few examples for how this could be valuable to you. The first one is enriching a user's profile. Sometimes we hear, hey, I need to grab an attribute from this old legacy database, like an employee ID or some other attribute, and I want to stamp it on the profile as a user is being brought in. And it turns out I can't. I'm HR mastered, okay? For some reason, can't get HR to do it because this is an IT process. So let me just do it in the course of a user being brought in so that I can use that for all my kind of access management policies. So you can add an attribute, you can update an attribute with your own custom logic. Another one is defining someone's username. So I don't know if folks are aware, but username in Okta is kind of this unique thing, right? It's what they log in with, and we enforce it to be unique. We're working actually on functionality to enforce other attributes like email to be unique. But what happens in the event of a conflict, right? Let's say John Doe comes in, your username mappings are first name dot last name, and turns out there already is someone there. How do you resolve that? As part of this request to your server, we will basically send that conflict in the request, and so that you can simply update username with your own logic, like first name dot middle name dot last name, in order to resolve that conflict. And finally, the last one is around matching, right? I talked about how we've extended our configuration to be able to match on any attribute on the profile, but sometimes I hear things like, hey, you know what? I want to match first on username, but if there's no match, I want to also match on this other attribute, almost like as a secondary backup process, right? And so now you can execute that kind of logic based on the data in the profile to kind of any type of matching rules that you want to implement. And all you're trying to pass back to Okta is, do you want to create a new user, or would you like to link to an existing user? So this is currently early access. It just went EA just a few weeks ago. And like I mentioned, we're actually working currently on, this is only for new users. We're working on updating users kind of in line to an import right now. So that should be released in just a few months here. So that was a little bit of what we shipped in 2018. I'll just talk a little bit about roadmap in terms of big investment areas. Number one, speed and scale. Anybody feel like their imports take too long here? Show of hands. Okay, all right, yes, we're working on it. That's my message here. We are not only working on supporting larger and larger organizations, but we're working on speeding up just the overall time that it takes to get users in from a source system. Like, we know that it's critical for some of these changes to be as close to real time as possible. And so we're not only working on speeding up what we have today, but we're working on supporting incremental imports, so only detecting diffs for more connectors like SCIM. We want to provide better monitoring and control over all the large-scale jobs that occur within Okta today. We want to make sure that you as admins are aware for where you are in a process, how long something's been running, and eventually provide you more control to pause, cancel, things like that. And then finally, the last one is really just a continued large investment in customization. So I talked about inline hooks, and we're continuing to invest there. Super excited about webhooks. The ability to take notifications from Okta in order to trigger your own process is really going to open up the degree to which you can customize what you want to do in other systems. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about workflow. I know that in the keynote, we kind of gave a demo for workflow for a security incident response case, right? You guys all texted Nick. We are going to ship a product this year on top of workflow for lifecycle management. And we think that this is really the platform that we're going to be building on top of moving forward. And so I built this weekend just a really short demo that I just wanted to show you guys. So this is our kind of workflow designer. Can you guys see this in the back? Yeah, cool. So what I did was, if anybody is kind of connected to an HR system, we have this concept of a card or a connector. And what this is actually me building a really basic onboarding flow with Bamboo HR. Anybody use Bamboo here? Yeah, a few folks. Okay, it's really popular, especially within our kind of mid-market customers. What this does is it basically builds that API call in a really easy-to-use connector interface. And what this says is it pulls Bamboo for a new or updated employee on a periodic basis. And it takes that data that we get back from that response in a really easy-to-use way, meaning we format each of the attributes in a way that's simple. So you have things like employee ID. You have things like their marital status, employee number. And for this use case, it's really work email that we're really interested in. And then correspondingly, you have the ability to implement logic, right? So we have logic that's baked into our connectors today. So for example, if a user has a username that is the same as someone that exists in Okta today, then link, right? It's baked in logic. But the real power of this platform is allowing this logic to be surfaced, to be easy to consume, and to be configurable, right? So what I've done is I've rigged up a really simple example, which is for my organization, I'm assuming that if their employee ID is less than 1,000, that they're an employee. If their employee ID is over 1,000, then I'm assuming they're a contractor. So what I want this thing to do is basically say, if their employee ID is less than 1,000, then I'll use this Okta card to create a user. And you can see it's kind of configurable based on what options are within our API today. In this case, I happen to want to create it without a credential. And what I can do is I can just simply drag and drop some of these attributes directly into here. And what I've done on this Okta card is map first name, last name, and their work email to both their email and their login. So all this is saying is when a user is brought in or from Bamboo, I want to create them in Okta, right? Super simple flow, but it turns out I want different logic for contractors, right? And what I've done here is if the employee ID is over 1,000, I want to use this compose card to put hyphen in front of their work email, okay? This transfers to an output, and then I map that output directly to another Okta card to create the user. So you can see this is a really simple example of what we call a branch in order to just modify kind of how you want to bring users in from a source system. And I'll show you kind of what it looks like in what we call our flow history, which is basically our debug pane. So in this first example, I created a dummy user. Their employee ID was 234. It's my name, and my email is arvil@okta.com, okay? And what happened here was I successfully created a user with Arvil Nagpal, arvil@okta.com, all right? And then you can see here in that a user 7890 with the name Bob Murphy with the email murph@okta.com, you can kind of see how it works in this data getting transformed across steps. So the output of this first compose card was con-murph@okta.com, and then the user was created in Okta with the corresponding values. Pretty cool, right? It shows you guys the foundation for what we're going to be able to provide you guys with templates, with a starting point for more configuration, because we realize that for some, our out-of-the-box connectors and the way it works today is great. Like, hey, it works, it's easy to set up. But for others, hey, I just want a little bit more customization. Maybe I want to add a notification at the end or a ServiceNow ticket. We're now going to be able to support kind of generic logic, generic API calls within the Okta product. So we're super excited about this. What I would say is that we're going to start with Lifecycle Management. All right, and we will ship product this year that will be focused on provisioning. That product will most likely be oriented at getting feedback from all of you, but it's really to automate some of these downstream provisioning use cases, like I mentioned, for joiner, mover, leaver. But this platform is really the foundation for other use cases. You saw security orchestration within the keynote demo. Customer identity is another big element that we know that workflow is equally important. Joiner, mover, leaver is equally important there. So we want to be supporting that. I'll just wrap up with just our future vision real quickly. We want to easily connect to any user store, whether that's cloud or on-premise. We want to provide users an amazing day one experience. We want to securely and quickly terminate all users to prevent rogue access. And finally, through workflow, we want to provide you the flexibility to accommodate your organization's business process and managing all of this. So that's all I've got. Thank you so much for coming. We've got like 7.5 minutes for questions. So if we don't get to them, there's my email. I'm unfortunately not support. So if you want product roadmap questions, that's probably where I can be the most helpful. And do we have a mic or something?
Hi, thanks. This question is actually for Cameron. I wondered if in your journey you found that your current organizational structure was a barrier, and if so, did you make any changes to drive this automation initiative?
I don't think it was necessarily a barrier, but it was something that HR and IT weren't talking as much as we probably should have been earlier on. So moving to UltiPro as a master just involved a lot of educating HR. Is like, you have control of this data. If you term this person in UltiPro, their accounts are going to be deactivated. So please don't make any mistakes, or it's going to have some detrimental effects on the employee.
Hi, back here.
I can't see anything. So, I'll just talk into the abyss.
So some of the features you were showing for the roadmap made it seem to me like when you're provisioning an email account during the onboarding process from an email service, that pausing on the import to make sure that their email address is available through the service, is that something that process is designed to accommodate?
Yep. So you could do something like, we'll pause. You could call out to Office 365, verify that email does not exist. It could be Active Directory. And then based on that validation, then you can then update their email during that process. That's a good use case.
Hi, so I have a question over here on the side, right here.
Okay.
So I'm onboarding multiple acquisitions,
Okay.
about one a week.
Okay.
And so with that, I'm wondering, are we going to have the capability to dynamically assign groups to tabs?
Sorry, dynamically assign groups to?
To tabs. So for instance, when you have your tab on your home page,
I see.
Okta, can I assign a particular group of applications to a particular tab and only have that group be able to see that tab?
Got it. So kind of fixing the visibility for a given set of users.
Correct. That way I only have one acquisition seeing their
I honestly,
tabs.
I don't know of anything like that on the roadmap right now, but I could connect you with our end user experience team. I think they might have more insights, or at least they could get your feedback, you know, so maybe we could talk after.
Okay.
I can connect you with them.
My question was specifically around group management. You made the comment earlier that you can import groups from Active Directory into Okta. Are you able to, once you import them, is Okta able to take over the management of groups and DLs? Is that capability available today?
So import a group from Active Directory with memberships, and then you want to kill that group in Active Directory, or you want to manage users?
I want to take over ownership and management of those groups in Okta once they get ported, or does that still have to occur in Active Directory?
No, yeah, exactly. Yep, so we have the ability to, of like profile masters and prioritization, as well as the ability to disconnect from a profile master. So the way this works is that you have the ability to both import groups and group memberships, as well as push groups and group memberships. With Active Directory, you can actually do both. And so, yes, it is possible, but we can talk in more detail.
Hi, this is Sandeep right here. Hi, over here.
Oh yeah, okay, sorry. This is like the most blinding light in the world.
So with the Lifecycle Hooks, it's really fantastic, makes life a lot easier for us.
Yep.
Today we are all doing our external customer provisioning use cases through SCIM. So with the Lifecycle Hooks come in, what does it mean for SCIM? Would it be there, or from roadmap standpoint, where does that leave us for people who are orgs who are using SCIM today?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch the question. So you're using SCIM to push to do provisioning to certain applications?
Correct. So if we have these lifecycle hooks, so for example, an external identity comes in and registers in Okta, we do want that provisioning to happen to real time in our downstream systems. And also, if a change happens, we can also push it back. Now with lifecycle hooks, it makes it easier. We can call APIs. I'm just asking, what does it mean for SCIM? Because many of us would be using SCIM today. So
So I think I get your question. Like at the end of the day, hooks are going to be an extension for a product. If you don't want to, if you have let's say an application that's not SCIM compliant, right? Or you don't want to stand up a SCIM facade in front of that application, then you can use hooks for a very similar use case, meaning every time a user is assigned to an application, I want to call out to my server, and that server will make a set of API calls to the underlying application. So I think it will be basically a parallel process that won't necessarily require the SCIM standard. Does that make sense? Yep, cool. Yep.
Can you clarify one point for me? I've heard a lot of discussion about HRIS as your master, and seemingly that enables two-way communication between Okta and Active Directory.
Yeah.
Is that the only scenario with which you can actually have bidirectional communication between Okta and Active Directory, or has that functionality been added? Because our environment right now does not tie into an HRIS.
Okay.
We're AD mastered, but we would like the ability to push information from Okta down into AD.
Yep. So the AD integration between Okta and Active Directory is bidirectional. So you can import from and you can push to the same system. That does not require being HR mastered at all. So we have many customers are using provisioning down to AD independent of what their source system is.
I can kind of speak into that too. So we're Systems that aren't connected with that two-way, we're leveraging the API. If we have an attribute we need to update in Okta, we'll use the API to push that in, and then that's available in Okta to all the other systems.
Yeah. So as you have UltiPro as this question is for Cameron. So UltiPro as a master. So currently in your environment, are the usernames and emails manually entered and created in UltiPro?
Yeah, so we got UltiPro onboarding and then the core UltiPro application. So we worked with UltiPro to set up that email with the new hires information to push out. So it's a standard formatted email, first name, last name, like in a format that a system can read and parse through. And
so, yeah, that's what, like for conflict resolutions and all those scenarios, it is like if somebody is doing a manual insert for the username and email, as you said, that next year you're rolling out the Bamboo integration. So is it going to be particularly with Bamboo, or would it be with the other HR systems?
No, these are generic capabilities for any system. I mean, it could be Active Directory for all we care. I think what Cameron's hinting is that, at different parts of your process, some of their identifiers, like an email or a username, can be created at different spots. We hear customers that don't want to create that, and they want it to be the burden of IT in order to model that data. Cameron's happened to put it more upstream, but if it's kind of more downstream and you're simply ingesting profile data, like their first name and last name, then we have existing functionality for you to create that username, create that email, and then we have that inline hook capability for you to do more advanced customization and the creation of those things. So
right now, the inline hooks can be utilized to custom create those logics.
Exactly. Yep.
Right.
So I know we're up on time, but I will hang out in the back for any other questions, or like I mentioned, if we don't get there, shoot me an email. But thank you. Thanks for all for coming.